Well, here we are again. It is what's today? Today is Wednesday, the 12th of November, and we're going to take a look at some results over in the UK from this past couple of weeks. We're going to focus on Bonhams today. In a few days, when the rest of the sales conclude, Drew Eats has a sale. They're running an auction. William Wallace is still going on, and when they finish, we'll go back. We'll take a look at them and a few other sales that took place, and then of course there's this Sotheby's sale coming up on the 21st, which is sort of an interesting auction as well. So we're going to start here, and this was the Mary and Peter and Mary White collection of Chinese ceramics. They had some nice things, and overall it did well. The overall trend seems to be that the prices are still quite good, but I think there's some noticeable interference or lack of participation maybe from some buyers in the U.S. and so forth. And I think it's due to the tariffs and some of the economic stuff that's going on right now. And I think it's inhibiting a little bit of activity in some of these sales. Things that were reasonably estimated. I've talked about this in the past. Things with reasonable estimates and the sales that had no reserves did very well. They went over their estimates, and it was absolutely great. Pieces where I think the consigners again are pushing for harder estimates, higher reserves. They're going to suffer for it. And again, if you're a person that's thinking of consigning, don't play that game. Because this is not the market to do it in. It's a good market to buy in right now, I think, and I think that the overall market is still very, very healthy. But I think that the tide has changed from the days when people can ask and demand very strong, very pushy estimates, trying to maximize their gain from an auction. I think it's a dangerous game to play. Let the auction houses tell you what they would suggest. And I think that when you look through the results here, the sales that had modest reserves, modest estimates, tended to do very well and go well above their estimates. Things that were pushed, they buy in, they don't sell. People aren't going to participate in that game. They're just not. All right, and let's take a look here and see some of the numbers that went through here. And this was a nice example here. It was this very good-looking Parfumer that we discussed a few weeks ago, and it did fine. It ended up selling for $3,840, and that was roughly, I think, right on the upper end of its estimate. Very nice piece of porcelain, rather unusual form too. This was an export sort of item, I guess, and beautifully done in beautiful condition. The enamels were nice, and it dates to the was this probably Kangxi period, but nice color, and did fine. Here you have another example here. I think this was estimated at 15 to 20,000. It was Kangxi brush pot. Ended up going for 30,000 pounds, 30,720. It was a nice example. They provided some very attractive photographs of it you could get a really, really good look at it. And this one came from, this was originally acquired from Robert McPherson over in London back in 2010. He's a top dealer, that sells great things. And you see his name often, like you do others, Marchands and these. You often see their names as part of the provenance of these pieces these days, because this is where a lot of collectors go. A lot of collectors don't buy. It's interesting. I've said it before. A lot of collectors don't buy the majority of their collections at auction. They rely on very, very good dealers to guide them along when they're looking for things. So you often see the names of the real players in the game, the Marchands, McPherson, Eskenazi, all the guys that really are deep in the game, because they can funnel to their favorite collectors some awfully nice looking pieces, and in the end they always make out with them. All right. And then hopping along over to this was this very, very nice Quillen dish. I love this. I love the density of the cobalt on it. Beautifully done. Jiajing period, Marken period. Let's see here. What else do they have here? 28 inches, 8 3/4. It's sold with no reserve, went for $5,376, which looked pretty good to me. I think that was a pretty good price, and there it is. And this is a Ming example. It's very, very nicely done. Lots of stickers all over the back of it, you'll notice. But beautiful deep cobalt. That wonderful, almost like a purplish cobalt in it. Very, very good color. And $5,376 for an 8-inch dish. And then hopping along over to this was something I liked a lot. I commented on it because I thought the estimate was awfully low. I thought the estimate was 2,000 or 3,000 pounds, as I recall. And this, I believe, also was unreserved. Yes, it was sold with no reserve, and it did great. It ended up selling for $10,240, but it was atypical. This was not your typical example, dated to the Wan Li period. And if we could get it to pull up this, there we go. This had really interesting decoration on it, very, very unusual. And it was not a market period example, I don't believe. I think it was just beautifully done. And no, it was not market period. It measured 7 inches in height, and it did very, very well. $10,240. And then over to this. This was something I commented on because I thought it was so nice. Shenzhen period, end of the Ming Dynasty, which, whoops, bring it back. There it is. But an unusual form, these conical cups or a bird vessel, but beautifully decorated. And the decoration on this, you'll notice, is very, very similar to the work that's always or often attributed to the transitional period, which is sort of is in that period. It is in that period. But people think of these sometimes, this pattern and these colors, to be more associated with 1650s, just a little bit later, 1650s, 1660 even. But this one was earlier, probably around 1635, 1640. Beautifully done, wonderful color, good form, unusual shape, and not very big. It sold for $3,328. This is very small. It's only 4 inches in diameter. It's quite small. It's a little cup, but very pretty. And then over to this was that very unusual Femi-Vert mountain incense burner. I thought this was absolutely amazing, and I'm not surprised at all. It went for 20,000 pounds. Very unusual thing. And it was fairly large. This was bigger than it looks. This was actually about 10 inches tall. This was a nice sized piece of porcelain. Because this form, you mentally you picture it as it being, this is like a 3 or 4 or 5 inch thing. No, this was 10 inches, a little over 10 inches tall. It was very nicely done, beautiful Femi-Vert decoration on it, very naturalistic landscape, mountain scene, that sort of thing, and caught some people's eyes, but very atypical, quite atypical. And they dated they dated Shenzhen to Shunji period, so through the whole transitional period, basically, is what they're saying. But they can't nail it down exactly. And I think this was sold by McPherson also. Yes, R.G. McPherson. He got some good things. And then the jar, as I recall, this had a fairly modest estimate, maybe 8 to 12,000 pounds, something like that. And I thought it was awfully low. I thought this was a very, very attractive jar with the hunters on it, the archers on the horses. Here they are, the warriors. And then you have the dogs in the foreground wrestling on the ground and so forth. But wonderfully decorated jar. Very, very pretty. Very nice use of the white background. Good use of negative space on it. And it was pretty good size. It was 24 inches tall. It was 2 feet tall. Big jar. I don't know what the condition was, whether it was perfect or not. It might have had an imperfection or two, because I don't think 21,000, it sold for 21,000 pounds, which comes out to, I guess, about 27 or 28,000 US dollars. I don't think that's unreasonable for this. This was a very, very pretty porcelain, and big. And size does matter. Size does matter with these. And then over to this, that unusually decorated coral red cup with underglazed blue with a lily on it. Very unusual type. And here it is. It's got a Chinois mark on the bottom. Of course, it's not Chinois, it's Kangxi period, but very attractive, very unusual. This is the kind of thing that if you're a collector who likes atypical or unusual things, this is something you probably would be attracted to. I think it was awfully pretty. A very, very unusual choice of colors too. And it worked. It worked beautifully. Sold for $7,040, or around roughly 10,000 US, somewhere in that range, which was very nice. It was only 2 inches wide. This was a very small cup, but it was very, very delicate and pretty. And then over to this, the month cup, the Wutsai month cup, a nice example, dated to the Kangxi period with a Kangxi mark on it. And I think this was a rather good buy. It went for about 21,000 pounds, or around 28,000 US dollars. In the past, we've seen these sell for more, but this was a nice one. Just the same, it sold, I think, a little bit on the reasonable side, but not much. I could have seen this selling for a bit more, but they don't always. They don't always. We've seen others sell for this much too. And there's the mark on the bottom. You notice that it's a little bit sloppy, not unusual on these little cups. Getting the mark in there is kind of difficult. And then over to this sale, that was sort of a quick look through it. Go and look through these auctions when they're done. It's a very good lesson to go through and just sort of drift down through them and look at the prices of things that catch your eye, the things that you like personally, and it gives you a good sense of where the market is for them at the present time, and you can sort of self-correct or self-adjust your thoughts on what you think things are worth, because they're always changing. And this was also a very good sale. This was the Fine Chinese Art Sale that took place on the 6th. And they had some very good results here as well. You had this really lovely carved cinnabar lacquer screen, beautifully done. They dated it just as 17th century, so probably late Ming, I would guess, but beautifully done, inscribed on the back with high relief characters. Actually, that looks like it might be more early Qing, 17th century early Qing, but very nice quality. My goodness. And but somewhere in that period, there we go. There's a close up of it. Very well finished lacquer, nicely polished, good smooth edges all the way around, nice detail, good groundwork, and in excellent condition. This was in very, very fine condition. And this wasn't a huge screen. This wasn't one of these giant floor models. This one was only about 9 inches tall. It's a fairly small table screen. Ended up selling for $11,500, or around 14,000 US, roughly. And then there's this, the Yixing stoneware vase by Fang Hu. And this was an early one. This was dated to the 17th century. And they believe it's signed by Zhang Shenxi, who was a fairly well-known potter at the time. But they gave it two possible dates, because it does have a date on it. It's either for 1643 or 1703. And I believe this particular guy is most often associated with 1643 as his dates. Because if he was making pottery in 1643, it's not likely he was still making it in 1703. Unless he lived to be very, 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 very old. So I think that they threw in that second date as a possible indicator that maybe it was by a student of his or something. I don't know why. Obviously, the crowd disagreed, because it ended up going for 44,000 pounds. So I guess the Yixing experts, and there's some awfully sharp guys out there. We remember the great Yixing pieces that went through Freeman's a year or so ago that brought a lot of money. They're out there. They're people that really know this stuff cold, and they've obviously looked at this. They probably found a comp, and it did very well. It brought 44,800, or about 55,000 US dollars. It was a strong price, and that's not the price that a student would bring these from that era of his or associate. That's what you get for the original artist. And then over to this. One of the nicest robes I've seen in a long time, an imperial yellow ground 12 dragon robe. This is an absolutely splendid example. I talked about it in the preview because it's in such unbelievable condition. It's in such amazing condition, and the color is perfect. And they had estimated it at around 50 to 80,000 pounds, and it blew that away. This was a heck of a great robe. Again, low estimates, modest estimates. 50 to 80,000 may not sound like a modest estimate for something, but it actually was for this, because in the past there have been examples of these that have sold exactly for what this one sold for. This one sold for 121,000 pounds, or about 145,000 US dollars. And we've seen other examples of this quality, but the quality of it was outstanding. The condition of it is stunning. I don't even see soil on the collar. And it had its full sleeves. The sleeves haven't been trimmed back at all. It's got these nice long sleeves on it. And you'll notice at the collar here, there's no sign of wear anywhere on this, and I doubt it was relined because the rest of it is in such great condition. So this was obviously gotten by somebody or given them at some point during the 19th century and brought back, and it had never been worn. It had never been worn by anybody, because when you look at it, you don't see any signs of any staining or wear or any use at all. Just this was woven, taken off, put together, put in a trunk, and that's what you get. A beautiful example, wonderful. And where did they say where this came from? No, it just said John McClure, 1837 to 1920. And then by descent in his family. So he got it basically when it was brand new, probably as a gift. That's often how these things came about. And then over to this was the Qinlong Phoenix vase. This had a fairly humble estimate. I think the estimate was under 100,000 pounds, as I recall. And I think at the time we commented on it and said, gee, that seems low for this. Well, it was low. It ended up selling for 279,000 pounds, which seems much more in the range. And let's see, where did this come from? Ferdinand Freiherr Dr. von Soren, 1909 to 1994, Zurich, and thence by descent in the family. So he acquired it probably in the 1930s or 40s, something like that. Beautiful example. Qinlong sold for 279,800, or around. That comes out, I think, roughly to about $325,000, $330,000 in the U.S. currency, to give you an idea. But a beautiful example. It was wonderfully done, and the phoenixes are very, very dramatic, I think, on this. The way they're both descending around the pearl. Hold on a second. There it is. It's a fairly dramatic scene. But if you zoom in on these, always zoom in to get a good look, you'll notice how superb the shading of the feathers of the phoenixes are. The shading and so forth. And when it's done over the blue like this, it really gives it a three-dimensional effect. It almost looks like they're floating 5 inches above the blue and white background, and they're not. It's flat against it, but it has the optics of that because of the contrast in colors in that strong orange. It's very, very attractive. All right, and then over to this. This was the painting that they attributed to Giuseppe Castiglione, Lan Shining, of course, the Jesuit. And apparently the audience thought it probably was by him. I think it brought 152,000 pounds, or about $180,000. And this is one of Prince Guogong, sixth son of the Yongchen Emperor. Very nice portrait, actually. He's never going to be emperor, but he's going to live well, and there he is. But it's beautifully done, beautifully done. And Giuseppe Castiglione, or Lan Shining as he was known, and he was buried there. He was a Jesuit, of course, and he went there and he became a favorite of several of the courts. And they found him to be, the emperors enjoyed his company a great deal. He did a lot of painting, and some absolutely astonishing painting techniques that he introduced to the Chinese that the emperors just loved it. And this is the kind of stuff that he did, but very, very good artist. He was an extraordinary painter, and 152,000 or around $180,000. So I guess we can assume that this was probably by him at that price level. All right, because they do examine them. They compare all the way they do with Western art. They compare the brush strokes, the techniques, the shading techniques, and that's how they arrive at these conclusions. And then you have this very nice Junyao light blue glazed bowl. Now, this had a pretty good estimate. I think it was estimated at about 60 to 80,000 pounds or something like that. Well, the audience thought it was better than that, and it ended up going for 114,000 pounds, or around 135,000 US dollars. This was not a big bowl. I think it was about 7 inches or so in diameter, if that. 4 inches in diameter, very small, but very rare type, extremely rare type, and done in the Northern Sung period to possibly the Jin dynasty. They gave both dates because they were uncertain. They're always a little bit uncertain on some of these pieces, but this was a really rare bird. And you can see the bottom, and these are not highly refined. The bottom of it's got some kiln activity kiln grit stuck down there. There's the bottom of it. All right, and you see the little imperfections and so forth. Those are completely acceptable when you have something of this early age in this terrific color. Beautifully done, beautifully done. And then hopping along over to this, this was really interesting piece. This is a Femi Vere of Young Dee's Dragon Barge, a double gourd vase with a cover. And this was a pretty good sized pot. This was 32 inches tall. This was a big piece of porcelain. Ended up going for 140,000 pounds, or about 150, $160,000. But what an enormous piece. And again, very dramatic scene of the barge down here with all the women on it going around the lake. I'm assuming that's probably supposed to be the lake at the Summer Palace. And here's an upper section to it, and so forth. The Summer Palace was just finished at the end of this, about the time this thing was probably made during the Kangxi period, when he ordered it built for his son. And but absolutely great looking piece of porcelain, and a miracle of miracle, it still had a lid. Now it looks like the lid's got a gold repair on it. Perhaps something probably happened to it at some point, which wouldn't surprise me at all. But the decoration on this is extremely good, and double gourd vases of this size are extremely rare. This is a very, very rare thing, and the decoration was great. I love the tumbler, the kid on top of the head of the dragon, and you notice the dragon's got the flaming pearl in his teeth. So he's captured perfection, which is something you don't often see. You don't often see that in Chinese art. It's usually the dragon the emperor is represented by the dragon trying to achieve perfection. In this case, he caught it, and he's got a kid standing on his head tumbling. And then over to this, the Chinese, there were a lot of Chinese export paintings in these sales, and this was just one of them. This was a very nice scene of Macau, sort of a panoramic view. An unusual view, though. An unusual view. Often you're on the bay or in front of the docks on this side, and this is a view that straddles both sides of it, which I think is rather interesting. And it has a very nice luminous sort of sky to it. And here you have all the buildings, and there are people out there that can go through, and they can identify all the buildings for you if you want it done, and to go with the painting. And here's where the port, where the boats are. And then on this side is that famous long beach and shore and so forth, with another smaller harbor on that side. And then the mountains in the back, the fort and all that closed it off. But very, very handsome picture. And this sold for $16,640, which I think was very reasonable for something that nice. It was beautifully done. And this came from Martin Gregory, of course, in London. He's the great dealer of these China trade paintings. And it was exhibited. There's a whole history of it here. Now, some of them didn't sell. It was interesting. Some of these Hong paintings didn't sell. And it may be because the estimates are a little aggressive. I don't know. But if you see something in this sale and there are unsold lots, get a hold of Bonhams and say, is there a post auction option available for these? Because in most cases they want to sell the stuff. They're not there to, they don't want to send the property back to the owner. They'd rather send the owner a check. It's a lot easier for them than horse around with it. And there's no point in hanging on to it. If you want to sell it, sell it. So if you see something in here in the unsold areas, just get a hold of them and say, listen, this lot didn't sell. Can we talk about it? And very often you can get quite good prices. I'm going to tell you that right now. You can get some very good deals. And then there was the Priestley and Ferraro material. Now, they had two sales. They had an online version where it was all pretty much unreserved, and it was very, very good looking stuff. And then they had a live component, which was this sale. And the online sale had that very nice jade bowl with the Buddhas on it that I talked about last Friday that did well. It brought 10 or 11,000 pounds. And there was the handsome, the Korean celadon with the inlay that had the Japanese, it was turned into an incense burner, the shaped rim, a celadon cup with the metal top on it for incense. That was in the online sale. That was also the Priestley and Ferraro store. They've retired. They're retiring and they're selling their inventory, and they did it the right way. I have to say, give them credit for this. You'll notice there are almost no unsold lots here. There's one or two unsold lots out of the whole sale. The rest of it all did very, very well. And I'll go through some of the lots because they had some real good pieces in here, particularly some great lacquer. If you like lacquer, there was one lacquer piece at the end here that did very well, brought a fortune. But you also had pieces like this. Now, this wasn't cheap either. It was a very handsome and very unusual type of Ming lacquer, Yuan to Ming anyway. I don't know, did they date it Yuan to Ming, or they just called it 13 to 14? They just called it 13 to 14th century. It's the Yuan to Ming dynasty lacquer box, it looks like, with this dragon or chimera, but very smooth. smoothed out, coming down over the top of the box. Very attractive. This is a very early style of doing lacquer in this way. It doesn't have all the excessive carving that came along a short time later. This was a much more almost Japanese looking in many ways, in the way it was done. But there we have it. And there's the side with the Greek key border on it and so forth. But the top of it, you notice, is fairly simple. It's just the chimera or the dragon ascending, coming in through the clouds, and that's all it really is. But beautifully finished, nice and smooth and flat, which is sort of an unusual feature, that these plain flat tops on here. And the audience loved it, and it ended up going for 165,000 pounds, which is around $205,000 roughly. And it was only 9¼ inches in diameter. It was not a big box, but it was a very, very pretty and unusual one. And I think the top of it was extremely striking. I think visually very, very, very attractive, and it got a lot of people's attention, I suspect. And then over to this was a really nice Long Quan Yuan Dynasty pouring vessel. And these pouring vessels do not turn up very often. And this was a particularly fine one. The glaze on it was extremely good. It looked almost like it almost had the quality of these early 20th century Japanese celadons that you see around. Very smooth. The color is good, and so forth. But this is from the Yuan Dynasty, and extremely well done. You notice the lip of the pourer has a little bit of a bead added to it. The proportions are excellent with the spout to the body of the bowl. Here's the bottom of it. Pretty much what you see on the bottoms of lots of Yuan and Ming celadons, this firing disc on here with a nice little, just a slight hint of an iron oxide running around the inside, and a glazed, smooth, flat bottom. But this is a highly refined example, much better than most of them. And this came down through, let's see, a family in Osaka during the 17th to the 19th century. And then Hikanobu, who bought it, he was born in 1929. And then it went to Inoue & Sons Oriental Art in 2015. It's been published, the whole bit. Anyway, it did great. It brought 61,000 pounds, or about $77,000, something like that. And then over to this. This was a nifty piece of Tang pottery. I love it when they do them in dominant and blue, and then they have the relief masks on it and so forth. Nice white pottery body exposed on the bottom. Still had its original top, beautifully spread out. This was a very, very very fine example of Tang pottery, much better than what you typically see. And notice the glaze. Very even, very soft, almost a matte finish, I guess is what you'd want to call it. I guess it is a matte finish. And then you have these galloping horses flying around the outside of it with these relief devices all over the body. And this did really well. It brought 51,000 pounds, or about 65,000 US dollars. Very rare. Did they give any background on this? Acquired in Hong Kong in 2008. That's all it says. It's coming from Priestley, so they probably got it from a private source, I'm assuming. And then this, a really large, an unusual Taoist immortal incense burner from the Shenhua period. This is a very rare bird. And I was thinking this would bring more. I was kind of surprised, but it wasn't as big. When they say very large, they don't mean large in the sense of feet. These incense burners during the Ming Dynasty tended to be very, very small. So one that's 7 inches is quite large. Most of them are 3 to 5 inches. They tended to be on the tiny side. This is a much, much bigger one than that, relatively speaking, but not a huge. This is not a 15-inch piece. And the thing that held it back was obviously the staples down the back. Because when I first saw it, I thought, boy, that's going to bring $80,000 or $100,000 easily. And I thought, boy, that'll do really well. And then later I saw the staples. So no, but $38,000 is still quite good. That comes out to about $45,000, but an extremely rare type. You don't find a lot of Taoist immortals on incense burners really during this time. You find them more often during, I think it seems, during the 17th century and onward, that kind of decoration. So it was a bit ahead of its time, but very, very pretty. And then over to this was another piece of lacquer. This one really took off. This was, but it was Marken period, Yongle period. Okay, Ming Dynasty and Marken period. Very rare, important, exceptionally rare carved cinnabar lacquer dragon bowl with its stand, the original stand, because often the stands are not original. You'll find pieces where they've sort of mixed and matched. We just saw a case recently with a Korean bowl, a Korean cup stand that had a bowl sort of nested into it. This is the original bowl with the original stand, and dated from the Yongle period, which was one of the real high points of Chinese decorative art. And if you look at the work of the quality of this lacquer, it is phenomenal and beautifully polished. And this looks like it's in extraordinary condition for its age. Absolutely extraordinary. It looks like it's never been touched. Just absolutely great. Even the inside of it, it's got the natural, age cracks in the body from the lacquer over time. But look at the interior. There's no wear to it any place. It's just in beautiful condition. The dragons are meticulously carved. The lotuses are beautifully done, and it did really, really well. It brought 889,000 pounds, and that's about a little over $1 million, 1,050,000. And as I recall, I think this was estimated. I may be wrong, but I think it was estimated at around 300,000 to 500,000. Had a fairly. I remember the estimate wasn't shocking. And I thought at the time, boy, that could do awfully well, and it did. Not a surprise, but it's a Ming Marken period Ming lacquerware is extremely rare, and a lot of, just as a cautionary note right now, there is a ton of reproduction lacquers floating around in the market now that have Qinlong marks, Yongchen marks, Chenhua marks, Yongluo marks, Zhuande marks. You name it, they're putting them on them, and they can make lacquer. This is the thing, you got to be careful. They can make lacquer. It's very easy to make it look old. It's very easy to take a modern piece of lacquer and make it look much older than it is. Be extremely suspect if you see a Marken period lacquer anything other than through a very highly, regarded auction house, or one of the the good ones that they actually have, people that know how to look at things, because there's a lot of them around, and I see them in the inquiry service all the time. People are always sending them in, and and I have to tell them that it's not a a Chinlung, basin or whatever the piece is. It's one of these modern copies, and they're very high quality. Same thing with cloisonne, of course. They've been doing that for some time. And then over to this. This was another good piece of lacquer that came up. This is a very large covered cinnabar box with also Taoist immortals, Yongle period, very unusual, and it did well. It brought 381,000 pounds, 6-character mark, and of the period, but awfully attractive. And again, unusual in that it's got Taoist immortals on it. There they are, but a very, very attractive box. And I forget how big this one. What was it? About 10 inches or something. 12 a little over 12 inches. It was quite large. That's big for one of these. Most of them are not. Most of them are fairly, 5 to 7 inches or so forth, somewhere around there. But this one was the real deal, and it did very, very well. It comes out to about $450,000 US. Handsome though. And then over to this. This was the auction of the Marsh collection. And this was a little bit all over the place, this sale. And some of the results, I can't really understand whether the piece is sold or not, or what's going on. Or they may not have published all of the sold prices yet. I don't know, because there's an area here where they say register now. And the auction ended, a week ago. So I don't quite understand what something's going on with their site, I think. So they maybe have something screwed up. But anyway, there were some awfully good pieces in here. And these people bought a lot of their stuff from the Marchants in London. Again, this is where people shop. And they had acquired them. A lot of the pieces came from them. And there's this very nice Kangxi period sort of pear-shaped vase. How big was this? It measured 9 inches in height. Beautifully done. Sold for 51,000 pounds, or around $65,000. But very unusual. Underglazed blue with underglazed red. And from this period, that makes it a rare bird. Very fine white porcelain, beautifully decorated. I love the mountains, the way they're done. They're almost floating, like free-floating mountains. Very attractive. And then this simple neck with a rain pattern, the rain border at the top. And this was beautiful piece. It looked to be in superb condition. And again, 65,000 US roughly. It did very, very well. And then there was this highly unusual. This is a really great thing. We talk a lot about underglazed reds because underglazed reds really push up the values. And here you have this is a rare copper red deer monkey pine brush pot with a Daoguan mark. So second quarter of the 19th of the 19th century, but the red on it was exceptional, exceptional decoration. And you can see a few areas where it greened, where the copper oxide turned a little bit green, but it actually works with this because it's turned green in the natural areas, like the pine trees themselves, which have green in them. So it's not a bad effect at all. I think it helped. And you have the spotted deer, the monkey, and so forth, but very unusual subject matter. Two monkeys and butterflies, and one thing happening and another. And as I recall, this had a $15,000 or $20,000 estimate, and it ended up selling for 63,000 pounds, roughly. So that's about $75,000. That's a very, very strong price for a Daoguan brush pot. But underglazed red in incredible condition and beautifully done. The red was beautifully done. This is about as good as the reds could get. And this was bought at Sotheby's in 1998 in Hong Kong. Very rare, very unusual. And then hopping over to this was this plate. Now this plate took off. This was not an enormous plate, but there's a reason why it took off, and I'm going to get into it in a minute. It's 4.5 inches in diameter. This was a very small dish, but it was made in they believe this was made in 1671, which was the year that they did the Emperor Kangxi did his first formal firing of his kilns in Qing when he came to power, and they were first getting back into making some porcelain. They think this was among the very, very first pieces produced during that time, and it's got the Zhonghe Tang mark on the bottom, and the cyclical date to 1671, which indicates this was in that very, very first batch. And again, very small, 4.5 inches, sold for 70,000 pounds, which comes out to around $85,000-$90,000 for this. But it's a historic piece for that reason, and it had underglazed red on it, underglazed blue, inscribed. Had everything you'd want, and it's rare because not many of these are still left. There's a handful around. There's some in the museums, and that's about the end of it. And let's see. This was bought from originally. It's got a C.T. Liu Paris label on it, who was, of course, the very famous dealer at the beginning of the last century. And then it was in the Cohen collection in the U.S. And then John Burwald at Burwald Oriental Art in London bought it and sold it to him in 1997. Very unusual, and John is very well known for his knowledge of the Kangxi period, the transitional period. That's really one of his favorite wheelhouses. So not surprised at all that he sold this to somebody. And then over to this. This is also a really great fine blue and white elephant, one of these elephant brush pots. Very unusual pattern, extremely unusual, with the boy sleeping on top of it. And there it is, wonderfully done. Or the young man sleeping on top of it. But I love how they represent the folds of loose skin on the elephant with all these circular lines. It almost looks like a prison costume in a way. And this was not a very, very big brush pot. It was 6 inches tall. But it was good size, and it came from a collection in San Francisco. Roy Leventrit, who died in 1968. And went to the Frey collection, and then went to Marchantz. Marchantz sold it, and it dates to the Shunzhen period. Sold for 95,000 pounds, or about $115,000. Which that may I don't know if it's a record for a Shunzhen period brush pot, but it's got to be close. It's got to be close. 115, 120,000. That's getting right up there. That's getting right up there. And then over to this very unusual Blanc de Chine Taoist figure of Zhang Li Quan or Tan Chao. Let's see, how big was this? 6 inches long. It's fairly small. Sold in Sotheby's in 1993, and then it was sold at Marchand's in 1994. So they obviously bought it at Sotheby's and sold it into this collection. But it's a very beautiful example. Absolutely beautiful, creamy glaze. It looks like it hasn't even fired. The way the folds of the robe goes, it actually looks soft. I think it's awfully nice. And there's a picture of the bottom. Incredible quality clay on this. Look at the kaolin. There's no imperfections. It's just beautiful white pure clay. And of course, the Delois clay was particularly well suited to molding and doing sculpture work. That's why they did so much with it. It's very different in its behavior in the kiln than the clay from Qing where they do most of the porcelain. This is a different type of material, different ratios, and they date it to the late Ming Dynasty. Ended up selling for 190,000 pounds, which is a very big price for a piece of Delois that's 6 inches long, and that ends up at about $220,000 for the piece. And then hopping along over to the transitional sleeve vase. I commented on this at the beginning because I thought this vase was just so darn pretty. I really did. I thought this was just an absolutely lovely piece of transitional ware. And I love the color palette. The painting on it is extremely tight. If you look at these lotus flowers coming up here, unbelievably tight drawing. And the same with the cobalt, the underglazed blue, and it had this lovely yellow added in over here. Very nice aubergine, good clean greens. It had all the colors. The color palette on this was very, very well thought out. And then this very simple, elegant border at the top of branches and flowers and fruit and so forth. Just wonderful pot. And how big was this thing? Was it about 17 and a half inches? Yes, 17 and 1/16 inches tall. It was a pretty good sized vase, and ended up going for 51,000 pounds, or around $65,000 US. Good price, good trade, nice item. And again, this was also sold at Marchand's. I guess they shopped at Marchand's an awful lot, and it paid off. And then there were a bunch of other things that sold. There were a lot of jades that sold. The prices were fairly good, I think, overall, because some of them were not extraordinarily rare types, and they all seemed to bring in the $1,000 to $5,000 range. Some of them didn't sell. And if you see a piece of jade in here you like, you may go back and talk to them about it and say, look, it didn't go through the auction. Do you want to sell it? And I think you stand a pretty good chance of getting it. And there are a few paintings that didn't sell. The silks all did quite well. And so I'm just sort of quickly flipping through it. But overall, the sales, I think Bonhams should be very, very pleased. They had a lot of auctions. I think they had 4 or 5 auctions. The Japanese sale we'll get to separately. And I think, given the headwinds that's going on right now in some of the economy, and not just for the art world, I think it just in general, people worry all the time about money, of course. And I don't think there's much to worry about. I think things are going to turn out pretty great. What was it? Goldman Sachs and one of the big banks just came out and they said they expect the market to rise by 10 to 15% next year. So because of anticipated growth from one thing or another. So we'll see what happens. So if that continues, that'll bode well for the art and antique market, because people like to feel like they can spend money on luxury things and play with their collections and do the things that they do. So and that affects everything from antique car collectors to Chinese porcelain buyers. It's all one big market. At any rate, that's what we got. It's been interesting. I have been watching William Wallace and Roseberry's, and overall, I think they should be pretty happy. They had a few misses. You always have a few misses, especially when you have this many auctions all in one place, all at one time. It's almost too much in a way. I know some people that are over there right now, and he wasn't sure which preview he could get to because there were so many of them, and they're scattered around the countryside. They're not all in one nice, tidy little area. You got to go over here, then you got to go over there, and sometimes there could be too much on the plate at once. And it almost looks like this was the case in a few cases over there. A few things. There were certain sales that did awfully well, and there were some sales that seemed just to get overlooked. And things that had very, very modest low estimates didn't sell. I mean, things for $300 or $400 didn't sell. And that indicates that they may have had fairly thin physical crowds in some of these sales, or the buyers just didn't have time to get to everything. So they went for the best pieces they could get, and sort of overlooked the trade goods and the more common wares that they might normally have wanted to buy for inventory. So we'll see. We'll try to figure it out as we go along. But anyway, that's where we are, and I hope you found it interesting. So get out there, and remember, always leave a bid. And this is the thing: when you go through and look at some of these results, say to yourself, would I have left a bid on that if I, leave bids. I say it over and over and over. If you see something you like and there's a price you'd be happy to own it at, leave the bid. You got nothing to lose. And as you've seen with my own cases here, I've done it. I've talked about it. Every once in a while, lo and behold, you get a surprise. You buy something for a fraction of what you thought it was going to cost, and it's fun. It's a fun way to collect. It's a fun way to collect. It's like a little bonus. All right. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll be back tomorrow probably with another video. I'm trying to get caught up, and I'm going to do one on the Marco Polo sale because they have just posted their auction. This is the sale in Milan that's coming up that has that astonishing Korean bronze in it. That sale went live, or the catalog went live on the Marco Polo site this week, and I'm going to do a preview about that. It's an interesting sale, actually. They got some nice things in there beyond the big bronze, and we'll talk about that a bit, and that's coming up on December 2nd. Is when the sale is. But we'll get to that. And there's some other auctions I'm trying to cover, and we keep going. It's gotten busy as we thought it would. Okay, bye-bye.